My proposition today is in relation to the CRPD, for those who don't know, because they don't practice in the general area of mental health, the Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities, and the provisions which are relevant to asylum lawyers here, and which I think, at least in the British context, and probably in other European contexts as well, is not complied with at all. So here we have the Convention. 27 EU members have ratified CRPD. 22 also ratified the optional protocol, which is the complaints mechanism. You probably know that in most UN conventions there's a complaints mechanism. And I had a quick look, and I saw that there were cases and complaints pending from 2013. So it's not a very efficient system by all accounts. The European Union itself formally acceded to the convention in December 2010, and it became the first legally binding international human rights instrument to which the EU is a party, and therefore is binding upon the European Union. The purpose, why do we have the CRPD? Well, it's there to ensure that persons with disabilities enjoy full and equal enjoyment of all the human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to promote respect for their inherent dignity. And the definition of persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So a fairly wide definition. What does it prohibit? Well, fundamentally it prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability, which it means any distinction, exclusion, or restriction on the basis of a disability, which has a purpose or effect of impairing or nullifying recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal basis with others of all human rights and fundamental freedoms, including a denial of reasonable accommodation. And reasonable accommodation is a very important part of the CRPD, because it means that there will be some flexibility in the treatment and the enjoyment of rights of people with disabilities, because there's a fundamental understanding that a reasonable accommodation is required. The definition there means a necessary and appropriate modification adjustments, not imposing a disproportionate or undue burden where needed in a particular case, to ensure to persons with disabilities the enjoyment or exercise on an equal basis with others of all human rights and fundamental freedoms. And I think, as a practitioner, this reasonable accommodation is quite often lacking in the process, which we see right from the beginning of when people with disabilities are received in the United Kingdom, all the way through to how they're accommodated, and in my area of their exercising their rights to gain asylum or other protections, humanitarian or subsidiary protections in the United Kingdom. So Article 4 of the CRPD, what are the general obligations of state parties who've signed up to the CRPD? To adopt all appropriate legislative and other measures to implement those rights, to take all appropriate measures, including legislation, to modify existing laws, etc., to constitute discrimination against persons with disabilities, to take into account the protection and promotion of the human rights of persons with disabilities in all policies and programs, to refrain from engaging in any act or practice that is inconsistent with the present convention, and to ensure that public authorities and institutions act in conformity with the present convention, and to take all appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination on the basis of disability by any person, organization, or private enterprise. So again, a fairly wide set of obligations, which are incorporated into the UK legislation insofar as UK nationals and people residents or who have the right to remain in the United Kingdom is concerned, but fails, in my opinion, in relation to those who don't have status in the United Kingdom, such as vulnerable asylum seekers. The convention doesn't specifically talk about refugee status or the right of refugees or asylum seekers. But Article 11 does have this contained in it, the situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies. So the state parties, the signatories to the Convention, shall take, in accordance with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian and international human rights law, all necessary measures to ensure the protection and safety of persons with disabilities in situations of risk, including situations of armed conflict, humanitarian emergencies, and the occurrence of natural disasters. Now, whilst this doesn't include asylum seekers and refugees, in my opinion, it should cover those who come to the European Union countries and be adopted by states in relation to them as well. And therefore, the non-discrimination aspects of the Convention should apply. Again, persons should be equal before the law. There should be legal protection. There should be appropriate steps taken so that reasonable accommodation is provided, and special measures which are necessary to accelerate the end of discrimination and the equality of persons with disabilities should be achieved. We're seeing quite a few cases in which those who are claiming asylum or other humanitarian protections are quite often discriminated by public health providers, general practitioners or specialist health providers, quite often turned away or not treated properly, sometimes on a complete misunderstanding of the law. You'll know that in the United Kingdom what's increasingly happening is the co-option, I don't think it's a stronger word, co-option of various people into the criminalization of so-called illegal migration. So you have landlords, employers, health providers, all needing to do necessary checks to ensure that they are treating, housing, and employing the people who have the right to be in the United Kingdom, including the taking away of driving licenses, the taking away of bank accounts. So all of these now act as a deterrent, and you can see where people are not aware, people who have disabilities are not aware of the system, they can very, very easily fall into traps where they're discriminated against in normal everyday things that they require in order to survive in the United Kingdom. Again, habilitation and rehabilitation. What are the services that are to be provided to people with disabilities in order to ensure that they can have a full and active participation in all aspects of their lives and in the general life of the community? And the parties are supposed to be there to do that. Again, quite often in relation to asylum seekers and refugees, it fails. There hasn't been many studies, and this is why I called it people with disabilities a hidden population, because there haven't been many studies on even the numbers of people with disabilities in the United Kingdom, or any statistics to do with who they are and what disabilities they have. The only study that I was referred to was one which was done by the University of York in about 2000. Subsequent studies were done where they sent a questionnaire out to various community organizations and got various responses. So here you can see the sort of breakdown of, sorry, the chart is not so clear, but it's the breakdown of the nationalities for which they got responses. So Afghan, Angolan, Armenian, Bosnian, Iranian, Iraqi, Kurdish, Latin American, Somali, East African, Tamil, Turkish, Vietnamese, Zaire. You can see how long ago that was. Zaire is no longer called Zaire, obviously. And they found that there was a lack of accurate demographic data on disabled refugees and asylum seekers, but that the numbers which they got back from these organizations, Iranian community organizations, Kurdish community organizations, the Medical Foundation, victims of torture at the time, seemed to indicate that there were thousands of people who could be categorized under the definition of the CRPD as people with disabilities. And I think the figure is between 3 and 10% is what I saw of all those claiming asylum in the United Kingdom could be categorized as people who are vulnerable because of disability. What type of disabilities? Again, conforming to the definition: sensory, physical, mental health, learning difficulties, or a number of those. Ranging from, obviously, those who have depression, psychological problems, to all those who have physical problems, either due to their claim, so being shot, or physical problems to do with kidney problems. So the whole range of disabilities. They found that there was indeed a huge number of barriers preventing disabled asylum seekers from accessing the primary services which they require. And as I say, I think that's been aggravated in the present situation of the UK legislation, which is de facto criminalizes a lot of the activities which people are taking place. And the main difficulties that people had were linguistic problems. So echoing what was said earlier about people not having access to English or information in their own languages. Mobility issues, so the difficulties in actually assessing, going to places, cultural issues, and the general lack of knowledge. And they found that this pie chart, again, sorry, I apologize for the fact, but it indicates the huge numbers of first languages that were spoken by the people who were said to have disabilities. Which again was part of the issue to do with the fact that they were not able to access very important services which they needed to access. And this would lead to a situation of poor social contact, personal care, poor communication, and support with parenting, amongst other problems. So what have been good innovations? Well, I think one of the things that was mentioned was the UK National Referral Scheme. It's been around, I think, a couple of years. Or no, it's been, I think, longer than that, actually. But I found that National Referral Scheme, if it works well, if it works properly in practice, is a very good mechanism by which vulnerable, in that case, trafficked people, asylum seekers, can be identified. One of the things which I mentioned yesterday was the existence of the Anti-Slavery Commissioner. The Anti-Slavery Commissioner is a statutory person whose job it is to protect victims of trafficking in various ways, and they've published films which allow all those people who come in contact with victims of trafficking to be able to assess who has been trafficked. There's also a policy on the National Referral Scheme which is very good when you're looking at, for instance, things that I have to argue, which is why a victim of trafficking may not mention his or her claim to begin with. So there may be credibility issues, but there may be reasons why somebody doesn't come forth with that information, demeanor, all sorts of different things. So it's extremely useful in that sense. And I can see no reason why the national referral mechanism, which is used for victims of trafficking, could not then be used for other vulnerable asylum seekers, including persons with disabilities. ESO apparently has developed a tool for the identification of persons with special needs, which is a toolkit which allows those who are involved with asylum procedure and reception to spot the vulnerabilities. Even if they're lay people, they don't have an expertise in medicine, psychology, or related fields, and that's very important because obviously most of the people who will be coming into contact with vulnerable asylum seekers with disabilities will be those who don't have specialist knowledge. A Protectable project promoting a process of early screening and orientation for asylum seekers suffering from consequences of traumatic experiences. The project started in 2012, and maybe other people would know how that's come about. The Reception Conditions Directive. Unfortunately, there's no mention of disability. There is mention of disability in the European Charter, but not in the Qualification Directive. But there is mention in the Reception Conditions Directive, as has been mentioned earlier, that material reception conditions provide an adequate standard of living for all applicants, which protects their physical and mental health. This includes ensuring that such a standard of living is met in the specific situation of vulnerable persons. And Italy has transposed that in 2015 to ensure that vulnerable groups are hosted together with relatives, if possible, in the same reception centres to get there as a support. In Austria, there's a federal law on basic care, which was amended to include the conditions of the Receptive Conditions Directive, and it stipulates that the special needs of persons in need of protection should be taken into account to the extent possible in the course of basic care and the allocation of accommodation. So, I mean, to finish with, I think there is a crying need. There is a crying need in these systems, especially from what I've seen in the UK system, dealing with mostly children, and obviously you can't compartmentalize vulnerabilities. So you have children who have got disabilities, who have also been trafficked, and permutations of all of that. There is a crying need, I think, to have the time and skills to be able to identify that and to properly prepare, accommodate, diagnose and treat those people within the system. Just to end on a more positive note, this was in Birmingham Immigration Appeal Tribunal at this time last week, where I had a child Afghani 14-year-old client. He was disabled, but not physically disabled. He'd been beaten, very badly beaten, by the French police over a period of 5 months, whilst trying to get from Calais to the United Kingdom. As a consequence, he had very bad headaches. But this consultation room was on the ground floor, and you can see it's called a disabled consultation room, and it's a nominated consultation room for persons with disabilities. And that if you have a need, if the need arises, and there was a need on last Friday, then you'll be asked to leave. So, so the good thing was, I suppose, was that there was a consultation room. The bad thing was I was asked to leave because my client could go upstairs to the consultation room. But there is a recognition in some circles of the specific needs of disabled people in the asylum process. Thank you.